Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us. You are watching Hillstrong's webinar, Conquering Healthcare's Top Cybersecurity Risk, Perspectives on Threats Inside and Out. I'm Kara. Today we're joined by Chuck Tommy, Hillstrong's founding partner, Fred Gordy, National Practice Lead at Michael Baker, and Eric Harris Jr., CISO at Veteran Affairs. Just a reminder, this is a live event, so if you have questions, please put those in the chat. I'll be monitoring those in the background, and we'll get to those at the end during a Q&A session. Again, thanks for being here. Enjoy. Chuck, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kara. I appreciate that. So, yes, today I think have a really interesting opportunity here and quite unique in that the three folks here on this webinar have completely different kind of viewpoints into the same issues. To get us started, though, let me just overview some of the kind of recent healthcare cyber headlines that are out there. The last couple years, it has not been great for healthcare as far as cyber goes. In 2023, we had somewhere north of 100 million healthcare records exposed, stolen, or disclosed through cyber breaches, and over 700 healthcare-related ransomware attacks. That's quite a bit. 2024, it kind of continued, still over 700 ransomware incidents, and the numbers aren't completely clear, as a lot of these things aren't, but somewhere in that same 100 million plus range of individuals in the U.S. that were affected. So that's getting close to 1 in 3 individuals in the U.S. being affected by these healthcare attacks or breaches. And one of the latest things, the middle of last year, July of 2024, there was actually OneBlood, one of the biggest nationwide suppliers of blood to hospitals, was shut down. They normally distribute blood to over 250 hospitals, and they were out of action for a period of time that started impacting hospitals. So again, unique opportunity here with Eric and Fred and hopefully myself to look at healthcare from 3 different angles. Right, we've got Eric, who's kind of the insider with being a CISO within the VA. We've got Fred, who is a contractor consultant that helps folks like Eric, implement and maintain their systems. And then Hillstrong and myself, who really look at these things from a programmatic perspective, the governance, risk, and compliance angle, trying to help lay out that master plan and ensure that we're complying to that plan. So to start things off, I just wanted to kind of see what our panel here thinks when we talk about OT in the healthcare setting. What does that bring to mind? What kind of devices or systems do you consider OT? Let's start with Eric.
Okay. Well, again, good morning. It's great being on here this morning. As we touched on it a little bit earlier, when you start talking about OT systems in a medical treatment facility, you're looking at some of the bigger systems, the MRI, CAT scans, devices, things of that nature. Anything, from my perspective, anything on a larger scale that is keeping the operations of the hospital or medical treatment facility up and running, because that's why they're in business. So systems like that. You can take it probably a step further, especially with like the proliferation of like telehealth carts, things like that. We'll probably touch on that a little bit later, but with virtual health care being more prevalent now, the number of devices increases the attack surface and things like that. So I consider those to fall in that category as well.
Got it. Fred?
Yeah, coming at it from a little different perspective. I mean, we've performed assessments in hospitals pretty much all over the U.S., Canada, and overseas. And there's an interesting commonality when you go to these sites is the facility engineering staff, the guys that take care of this stuff, and the IT side, there are some of the devices in there that they go, well, I think he has it. No, he has it. And to give you an example is, for example, the MRI machines. It's not the machine itself; it's maybe the power that the monitoring of the power. And these guys, I'd say, well, we're looking at the systems, and I said, what about the backup power or the power to these systems? Oh, well, that's IT. You talk to IT, and they would say, well, no, facilities is supposed to be taking care of it. And the reason I'm saying this is there are things that, like the HVAC system, well, IT knows that's facilities, or the racks and the MDFs or whatever, that's IT. But there are some crossing there that both of them will assume the other one's doing it because nobody's really sat down and decided who is roles and responsibilities of which particular devices. And I'll finish with this is, there's another aspect to this that I think people overlook sometimes is what is the failure of the facility side impact to the operational side? Because I'll talk about this later, but in one case, surgeries in 50 hospitals had to be canceled because the HVAC system was, the facility guys can no longer see it. But if you can't see it, you can't monitor it, and you can't make sure that the air pressure inside the operatory suite is correct, the temperature is correct. So they had to cancel.
Yeah, it's amazing the kind of hidden dependencies that if you're not experiencing an issue, you don't think about it, right? I would even extend that, and Eric, tell me if I'm right here, but electronic medical records. If you can't access the records,
oh, absolutely,
then your operations, OT is shut down.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a treasure chest, so to speak. Looking at it from a defender's perspective, that's a wealth of information. Again, treasure chest of stuff that would fall into that category as well, I would say.
Yeah.
Well, if I can, Chuck, along that lines is the reverse of the impact. From an IT perspective, there can be impacts to things like the oxygen regulators, the different equipment that monitors the health. And in fact, you can look this up, and I don't have it right in front of me, but there are 2 deaths attributed because in one case, I think it was a child. The ambulance was bringing it in. They had the hospital suffered a ransomware attack. They didn't have any of the equipment, but they let the kid come on. And as a result, he died or she died. And then the other there was a lady who had a heart attack. This hospital said it had been hit by, this is another one, been hit by ransomware and said, we can't take them. So they had to divert, and they ended up having to go much further, and they weren't able to save her, so she died. So,
and that's the key here, right? We talk a lot in OT circles about the possibility of affecting safety systems or whatever, and having issues, but so far there's been very few injuries, and I'm not aware of too many deaths either on the like the industrial side. But those are 2 really stark examples of what can happen when the OT systems go down, right? So let's kind of follow that a little bit further. What have you guys seen in the past like 10 or 15 years as far as connectedness in the healthcare setting? The Eric, you talked about the attack surface earlier. How has that been affected in the last 10 or 15 years?
Okay, I guess I'll go first. Or just to expound upon what I was saying earlier. Over the past decade and a half, and things like that, technology is progressing at a alarming rate. Depends on how you look at it, and it's great for our medical treatment advances in treatments for various disease or conditions and things like that, which is great. But I always have to look at risk. And again, we go back to the proliferation of devices, systems, applications that are out there on the network, or as we say, in the wild, right? Case in point, it's not even a decade. Let's go back to 2020, January, February 2020, before the pandemic actually kicked off. There were telehealth capabilities through many of the facilities, medical treatment facilities, but it wasn't as commonplace. The pandemic made it commonplace, right? So people still have to be seen. And from the perspective of working in the VA, servicing veterans, a lot of these veterans were not getting the treatment they needed as fast as they could pre-COVID, because a lot of them are not, they're immobile, right? So the proliferation of these telehealth cards and things like that actually sped up by the pandemic actually helped out. But when you do that, you increase the attack surface, you increase the number of targets that a hacker, cyber criminal can access. And this is definitely applicable, and I'm sure Fred can expand on this in a moment. But certain things they're just not considered. Security is not considered when you get these devices initially, or case in point with industrial systems, things like that. Security is not the first thing that comes to mind when these things are being procured or looked at, and it definitely won't get considered if someone who's in the security field is not at the table when it's time to talk about these things before you procure them. And the same with the telehealth cards and things like that. I just keep falling back on those because we're constantly having to patch them because they have a lot of vulnerabilities. But their design is to provide that service. So attackers know that these are soft targets, so to speak. They don't have the same fortifications as the other information technology systems does. So that would make it easier for them to get in. And once they get inside the network, then they can expand. They can move laterally and vertically.
Yeah, great points, Fred.
Yeah. So I mean, Eric put it very succinctly. These devices were never designed in the beginning to be able to protect themselves. And I don't know how many people out there. I figure most people have. If you've seen the movie Jurassic Park, there's a scene where the goat comes up out of the ground and is tied to a stake in the T-Rex cage. That's what we've done with this. And another thing, what Eric said is so true, is when you look at IT, it's a CIA principle: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I come from the building control space. I know, Chuck, you're industrial control. There's actually some differences there. But in the building control world, it was AI.
Yeah,
and that was it. I mean, no thought to confidentiality. In fact, when I moved, I was an IT guy until 2000. And when I moved over to this world, it was a culture shock, because it was, hey, let's just put a public IP in it and let anybody get to it. Yeah. And so we've got this legacy situation of 25 plus years of doing this. And now you're bringing in stuff that is better designed and better built, but you're attaching it to all this old stuff. And those networks are still what they are. So.
Yeah, no, great points. So that kind of brings up in my head, I think you mentioned that really confidentiality wasn't really part of the thinking from a building controls perspective, but definitely is top of mind for folks like Eric with HIPAA and those types of requirements. That's all about data confidentiality. So Eric, are you now, when you spec a new system or whatever, are you requiring like some kind of certification against maybe IEC or other standards that are out there? Talk about that for a little bit. How are you trying to make sure that as new stuff comes in, it is compliant with things like HIPAA?
Okay. Since I've solely worked in the federal space, the compliance vehicles that I deal with, frameworks I deal with the most is RMF, NIST Risk Management Framework, right?
Yep.
So, and we just finished a network accreditation 3 weeks ago. So we received our authorization to operate, which is, great. Now we're in the continuous monitoring phase. But to your point, so what I'm looking for, if we're procuring, IT initiatives, be it hardware, software, whatever, from a hardware perspective, you're looking for something that's already has some type of accreditation, and it has to at least meet bare minimum requirements as it pertains to RMF. If it doesn't, you're probably gonna have a hard time procuring the system, because I know from a security perspective, anything that you bring into our boundary that's going to change our boundary significantly is going to cause us to have to go through a reaccreditation of the entire network, and nobody wants to do that, right? That's a lot of work. So you want to bring in something that has an accreditation. There is a process where you can, if it doesn't have an accreditation, you can do an assess only type accreditation or type accreditation for that specific thing. But the point is, we're looking for something that has already been through some measure of federally acceptable compliance checks, and that's in regards to security controls, and in the medical community, privacy controls. All right, that's a big thing too. So if this went through something like that, then that's what I'm looking for. Hopefully, it has it before it gets to me, and then if it doesn't, then we can do the work on the other end to make sure we can pull this initiative in and get it accredited and deployed.
So Fred, when you're starting to see, or I guess the question is, are you starting to see in your RFPs and such that come across your desk, are you starting to see these requirements, and how many different ones are you seeing, and are they, what does it take to kind of make sure that you are complying with that as you respond to those?
So let me start first with just, again, reiterating my perspective. I'm primarily from the commercial world, non-federal. However, when I moved to Michael Baker, 90% of our work is federal. So I've been able to see that world. And, it was kind of almost an education inside of Michael Baker when I came here. It's like, well, doesn't everybody use this? Doesn't everybody use this? In the commercial world, it's a scramble. There are, HIPAA, all these other things that apply. However, when it comes to the building control side of things, I worked with one group somewhere, and they were trying to apply NIST 853. But it still had a lot of holes. It's a great standard, don't get me wrong, but it had a lot of holes. Over the years, and about 4 or 5 years ago, I started working with an organization. It's a nonprofit called buildingcybersecurity.org, and we partnered with ISA, and we took 62443 and made a profile, if you will, for commercial buildings. And, when people talk about building a standard, I have a much greater appreciation for what it takes, because we literally met Monday, Tuesday, Thursday mornings from 7 to 8 a.m. for 4 years to go through 62443. And under, we didn't just do it rogue. We had Andre at the time, I think he's retired, kind of was our overseer, and Johan, which I think but anyway, even with that, it's still a financial decision. It's not a standards decision. It's a financial decision. So when they're looking at incorporating either 62443 or 882 or whatever it happens to be, there's financial considerations that have to be made. And that's where it's a difficult playing field, so to speak, because you bring in new stuff, but you're attaching it to old stuff. And what are we going to do? And that same hospital that I told you wanted us to do 853, we took a look at their network, and it was a flat 16 network, which, what is that, 65,000 something potential IP addresses. And
Right.
this was a very well-known commercial hospital, was tied to a university. And they had bought all these managed switches, but they didn't do anything with them, and they just left it at that point. So if I penetrated one side, I was everywhere.
Yep. Yeah. So that's kind of one of the things that we see a lot from trying to help at that GRC level is folks kind of fixate, or we call it the shiny object syndrome, right? Let's put in firewalls. Let's follow this standard. Let's put in IDSs or whatever. But they don't have a strategy over top of that for one, how to deploy it completely across multiple sites, right? So that it gets well installed correctly at every site, and then to maintain that over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to monitor it. So if you don't have that kind of programmatic, mechanism in place, then it becomes very hard to ensure compliance, initially, and then over time, things start to decay if nobody's kind of watching, right?
Well,
that's what we find.
It's just a little bit more on that. It's interesting because the shiny object, I like the way you said that, is because somebody told them we need to buy these switches.
Yep.
And, I've been in a lot of uncomfortable situations because you pay me to come in and tell you how you're doing, right? Mm-hmm. And when I told them, I said, you're wide open. And they said, but we spent millions of dollars on these switches. And I said, and you didn't configure them.
Yeah.
So, it's just, let's throw something at it and it'll be okay.
Yeah. It gets uncomfortable telling somebody their baby's ugly, right? So,
yep.
Yeah.
So, okay. So if we think about this, from a kind of a larger perspective, what are some of those major challenges of making sure that you select the right system, have a plan in place, and actually deploy that? What have you come across as issues or challenges trying to get that done? I don't know, Eric, you may have a insight into that on the federal level.
Considerations, cost is always a consideration from multiple perspectives. On the federal side, we're operating off of a budget that's that gets pushed down from the clouds down to us, right? So if there are cuts, the requirement is the requirement, period, no matter how much money you have. So, but if operating off of a government that's pushed down to you, that's potentially getting cut. So that's going to affect your ability to necessarily to get certain things that you may had your eye on. But that's systemic. That's why we have these annual reviews and things like that. So it's a forcing function actually for us cybersecurity professionals to constantly monitor the environment, see what we can and can't live without, what's the second, third order effects of those decisions, things like that. Another thing that kind of touches on what Fred was saying is getting key leaders to understand the total cost of ownership when it comes to these security initiatives. Like you said, I like the shiny object syndrome. I like that. So, and you have people on your team, that have peers that work in other teams in other regions across the country. They talk because they cross talk to help each other out with solving security issues and things like that. And they also talk about the new gadget that they just bought.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we got this. Oh, y'all got that? Oh, okay. All right, that's nice. I'm gonna run that up the chain. It seemed like a good tool. Maybe we can get it. So you end up, and they don't understand the total cost of ownership sometimes. Okay, well, so you want to get this $1 million device. What's the value of the asset you're trying to protect?
Mm-hmm.
If it's $10, then you probably don't want to get $1 million protection mechanism for that. But it doesn't matter if it shines, right? So that's kind of where we're at with a lot of stuff. And it's not just a financial thing either. That total cost of ownership also plays into other resources, and I'm talking about people, time.
Oh yeah.
So Fred was talking about someone wanted to use NIST 800-53 as their framework. Not to be unprofessional, but my question would be, why would you choose that if you had other options? It's a great framework, but understand what it's designed for. It's designed for federal systems that's potentially going to be touching classified information. And even though patient information isn't necessarily classified like Department of the Army type classification, PII is sensitive and things like that. So that's why you have like 8 privacy controls built into that book. So the whole point of it is manpower intensive, it's time intensive. So if you had an option and you don't have to deal with classified information, I would steer clear of something that would drain my personnel resources. Look at something like NIST CSF, things like that. So that ties into that total cost of ownership too. It's how much time and people am I going to need to maintain this initiative that you're pursuing.
That makes sense. Don't like go for the overkill if you don't need it, because you're going to get pressed later to trim your staff and budget and all that. So if you can't justify it, then it's going to happen probably.
Absolutely.
Get cut.
Yeah, just to what Eric said is so true, and kind of to keep that shiny object going is I've seen this time and time again, using, not picking on them, but using that one as an example. Somebody heard that we as in them should use 853. Then what happens is everybody gets fixated on that, or they get fixated on this device that's going to solve every problem.
Yep.
But, like Eric said, the first thing that I was taught when I started going in to look at healthcare facilities was it's about the patient. That's it. Money, not that money doesn't matter, but you have a human being that you're taking care of. So all the things that surround the care of that human should be taken into consideration. But also, you don't need to overcomplicate things on things that don't. So it's not just a one size fits all. You have to really understand the risk appetite of the assets that you're trying to protect. If you don't do that, and you get fixated on one thing, you're going to either overload it and miss something. I mean,
that's a really great point. At Hillstrong, we talk about it's the mission, right? What is the mission of the organization? And if the cybersecurity controls that you're thinking about implementing don't enhance the mission, and that, that's a broad definition. There's a lot of ways you can justify things, but if it doesn't enhance the mission overall, then why even think about implementing it, right? We need to concentrate on things that can enhance the mission, whether that's making it less likely that you're going to go down, making it less likely that you're going to leak information, all kinds of ways that you can show that cybersecurity controls can enhance the mission, but you need to be able to show that, or you're just kind of throwing money at a problem that may not do any much good overall. So yeah, that's a great point. What about, I'm really interested in this one. I've done a bunch of series lately on getting IT and OT to work well together. What have you seen in the hospital environment or the healthcare environment? Are some of the, maybe you have a story of where you tried to help OT get more secure and you had a little pushback. What are you seeing there as far as the collaboration between IT and OT these days?
You want to go, Eric?
Sure.
I'll that's gonna let you kick this one off.
Well, I was going to say, have we got about 3 or 4 hours? I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I mean, it is just I mean, I've got examples of where IT jumped in, and again, not being disrespectful, but it's that lack of understanding. They learned just enough about this system. They had a centralized system that monitored 150 locations across the United States. And I won't go into what exactly happened because there's some legal implications, but they removed a user. They learned how to remove a user from a very well-known control system. And what happened is when they did that, they didn't know that the user had actually used his user to be the machine-to-machine communication. And those sites started dropping off. And I verified this with the manufacturer because I worked real close with them. They had 6,000 hours to get that fixed.
Wow.
By removing one user. That incident where I talked about the hospital had to cancel surgeries for 2 days, they pushed a Java update out to another well-known manufacturer, and it locked up the systems. And so they were rolling these out, and that's when we had begun working with them, but we hadn't gotten to the point where we were interfacing with IT. But I will say this, that, IT listened, and they said, okay, well, we have similar interests with different criteria that we got to meet. And so there's I got a lot of them.
Eric, you want to jump in with anything?
Yeah, actually, I mean, that whole, cross-functional collaborative relationship between, for me, the three main entities would be, the IT cyber people, your facility managers, and your engineers, right? It was a learning curve for me. My first position that I took once I retired from the Army was at a medical treatment facility here on the local base in Augusta. And again, it was a learning curve. I'm a civilian now, and I'm trying to figure out. I know what I do, and I have an idea of what they do. But the thing was, you can't think that that's the way it's going to be everywhere. And what I'm trying to say is, okay, so once I got an understanding of how the relationships work, had a shared understanding of who's responsible, where does your responsibility end and mine begin, like Fred was talking about earlier in the conversation. But again, this is also agency specific. So this medical treatment facility fell up under DHA, MedCom, Defense Health Agency, not the VA. So when I get over here to the VA, it's handled completely different. So what I had gained shared understanding of about my responsibilities and what facilities and what engineers' responsibilities wasn't the case once I got over to the VA. And with turnover personnel, and that's another conversation, but it all points to, you start losing people and getting new people. Now you have to re-educate people about their responsibilities, who does what. But I don't really have any horror stories. Fred sounded like he had a bunch of them about that. I really don't have any horror stories about it. There's really, for me, was just are you sure I'm supposed to do that? Or is it that you just don't want to do it? Right. That's usually my biggest headache. I don't have any horror stories outside of that.
Well, I think I heard you say, and this is the big point, right? You have to go into kind of every new situation with an open mind and make sure that you are trying to learn as much as possible from both sides. And, we're often kind of in the middle, right? Trying to help IT and OT work together and get that collaboration going. And as many places as we've been, it's a lot of the same issues, but they're manifested differently at different sites too, right? And it could be, past mistakes that were made. It could be just the culture. It could be even regulations sometimes get in the way because people feel like they are tied to a regulation and they have to do this. And, the other entity may not understand, kind of how important it is to follow that regulation. So there's a lot of that, but it's really solved, I think, almost always, but with additional communication, right? Getting everybody in the same room, making sure everybody understands that we're all working towards a common goal. Again, the mission. What's the mission, right? And that yeah, we may have different ideas of how to get there, but let's just talk about it and figure out how to get there that doesn't impede somebody else's way of doing business, right? Or what their mission is, right? So we've got a couple questions that have come in from LinkedIn, and this is an interesting one. Maybe Eric, this is more for you, but they want to know kind of what kind of insider threats have you seen that might be maybe unique to a healthcare facility?
I don't really think I've ran into anything that would classify as necessarily unique in my own personal experiences. But the insider threat is real, and probably the most frequent and from my perspective overlooked is about account management and access control. And what I'm talking about is people leaving an organization. That's one of my biggest problems. People leaving the organization. Accounts may or may not necessarily be disabled after 30 days of inactivity like they're supposed to. And that falls on, your sysadmin team more times than not. Or the account's not completely terminated or deleted after 90 days. You also have situations where you have people who transfer within the organization. So now it's about, your privileges. What type of access do you need? If you're going from a lower to higher level responsibility, then you're probably going to get more privileges. But if you drop down from a higher to a lower level responsibility, then you're probably not going to need all those privileges that you had when you were at this position. It's like from an IT perspective, let's say you, and this happened a lot when I was working, Department of the Army side, where, IT, the cyber workforce, based off of 8570, well, now it's DOD 8140. It's basically the baseline certification chart. Anyone in the cybersecurity workforce, based on their position and level, information assurance manager 1, 2, 3, information assurance technician 1, 2, or 3. There's a particular certification that ties to those levels, to each level, right? So let's just say you're an IAT level 1 and you do sysadmin work. At a bare minimum, you probably need a Security Plus certification, right? So your Security Plus certification expires. You didn't pay your CE. You didn't do your CEs. You didn't pay your fees. Your certification expired. By regulation, your certification expired. You are no longer a privileged user. So your rights are supposed to be revoked, and you're supposed to be dropped down to general user status until you get your certification back. Sometimes that doesn't happen. So this person now, by virtue of not having their certification current, is a general user that has privilege level access to the system's admin rights. Those are the most common insider threats I deal with, things like that.
Interesting. Fred, what have you seen?
So, the incident where I was talking about the guy that they removed his user, he was let go for some things. But the key point I want to make there, Eric, was, everything he said is like spot on, but to add the layer underneath where I'm at is that particular user that they removed, they did have Active Directory, but he had created, the thing about these systems, they will let you create local user accounts.
Yep.
And so IT can't see that. And that's what I tell, I'm like, you got to put the access control on these things down to the point that a vendor, even when the vendor comes in, it's only active during the time he's there, and then you got to disable it. I've got situations where users have been fired and there's no policy or process around that. So one guy came in that night through TeamViewer and went in and bricked some controllers and all of that. But it is a culture, as I said earlier, about availability. So you got to overcome that. And these guys got to understand the reason that they are giving individual users, and there's an accountability with it. So it's like the guy I told you about that came in and bricked controllers. They were using one username and password, and it was the vendor, that a vendor employee. They let him go. They didn't let the customer know. He came in and bricked it, and they wanted me to look at it. And I said, well, there's the only thing I can tell you is it came from this IP address, and it said, admin. But you don't have anything legal you can do with that, because
Yeah.
I can spoof an IP address and you're using the same username password for everybody. So there was no recourse.
Yeah. So that sounds like it comes back to having, strong policies and processes in effect to make sure, A, that it doesn't happen in the first place, and B, that you have some kind of mechanism to detect and to terminate privileges even quicker than the 30 days, right, of inactivity. If it's for cause termination, you want to be able to make sure that you get it out of the system as quickly as possible.
I don't know if this is correct or not. It's just something that I heard one time, but psychologists or whatever say that if somebody's going to retaliate, it's going to happen within 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a system like a hospital system, you kind of want to make that a priority, right?
Yep, seems like a big risk there. So one other question that looks like came in from LinkedIn here, and this is I like this one. This is talking about kind of the insider threat a little bit, but more about how do you turn the insider threat to your advantage, right? Your people. What is the significance of awareness among non-technical staff in a healthcare environment? So, do you do training? Do you do any exercises to really help drive home the fact that people can be not just the weakest link, which they can be at times, but also they can be a significant part of the system to detect and respond to issues. So what do you, anything to add to that, Eric?
Well, you hear this a lot in the security world. You want to try to make sure that security is built in instead of bolted on. You hear that a lot. So for me, and I've had to live this a lot. Trying to find places where you can seamlessly integrate security awareness training into daily operations. So something I recently spoke about at a conference is my approach to security awareness training is at a minimum a three-pronged attack. There's the ongoing continuous security awareness training. That's again, it's ongoing. You tie that into your annual requirements, right? Because you have an annual security training requirement that you have to conduct to keep your network access. No matter what your role is within the organization, it's just to be able to get on the computer, to get on the network, right? And then the other two prongs of the attack for myself, and it's shown to work. It decreases the number of reportable incidents, and that's what I'm getting at. So, one, you want to get people when they come on board.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Make sure at the bare minimum there's a high level security awareness training portion as part of the onboard process for your organization. It doesn't have to be anything grand scale, anything like that. It could just be like one or two things that are the most common things to look out for. Here are your points of contact if things don't look right to you. And that's as far as it really needs to go. Maybe you can expand on it a little bit further. It just depends on how much time you have and how many people are tied into the onboarding process. Like with us, it goes on for days and every department has to speak on something, right? So we have like 20 minutes, so that works. And then you want to get people on the back end, people who are leaving the organization, ensuring that they're turning anything that's sensitive, like their access badges, deleting files and things like that from their workstations that might have their information on. Make sure you pull, because people save their personal information sometimes while they're at work. They might pay a bill at work or something like that, right? And one other thing before I get off of this, I try to maximize October personally, because that's cybersecurity awareness month.
Yeah.
So if you really want to go all out for security, that would be the month to do it. A lot of times you can secure local funds for things like that. That everybody likes swag bags, right? So incentivize participation. Give out some free mouse pads and ink pens, or just whatever to get people involved. But don't just hand them out. Make them engage you. Make them participate in the formal trainings that you hold in your auditories and things like that. That's the way I approach it.
Over time, I've kind of changed a little bit of the way that I do things. But one thing to remember, the guys that are running your building are fixers. That's what they do. They fix. And they fix with a purpose. And a lot of the times the purpose is to get people off their back. I mean, let's just be real. So the first thing I kind of do is when we go into an organization is, first off, they got to know that we come from the same world as they do, because it's like these guys are like, don't come in here doing something you don't understand what I'm doing. But what I try to make them understand is what we're trying to do is not make your life more complicated. By just putting in some basic cyber hygiene, you're actually increasing operational resilience. You're also increasing your response, or decreasing your response time, and decreasing what I call situational paralysis. So when something happens, everybody's like, what? Well, if you have just some of those basic things, and then when you begin to ingrain in their mind, I mean, I think we're all old enough here to know that when there was a day when OSHA wasn't a big thing. I mean, I was hanging off the side of stuff or whatever. But now a fellow employee will turn you in if you're doing something stupid. Why? Because there's incentives. There's, if you shut down a job site, I got to go home and I don't get paid. So when you have to know your audience and what it is that triggers them.
No, that's great. I think, the human element is so important. And I think we underestimate how much that they can be helpful versus hurtful, right? We've always, that whole, the human is the weakest link. It can be true, but it can also be, we can also turn humans into great sensors in our, security network, right? And if they know what to look for, and they know what not to do and what to do when they see something that's odd, then, you can really turn them into a kind of a force multiplier, right? From a military perspective. So let me we're getting down here close to the end. So let me ask this question. It's a, kind of very open-ended. Is there anything that either one of you would just like to make sure people know from a healthcare perspective that might be something about that it's different, or that you've learned in your time in the healthcare sector that you just think people should know?
Well, if you don't mind, Chuck, I just want to throw some stark realities at the people.
Sure.
So if you could pop that first slide up.
Let's see, I think it's this one.
No, the next one. Oh, the one that.
That
there
one.
you go. Yes. So before we did this webinar, literally, I don't know, Chuck, what was it, about like 10 minutes before I sent it to you guys, is if you guys are not aware, there's a thing out there called Census. There's also Shodan. More people know about it. I like Census because it digs deeper. Just a quick search of things that identify themselves, that's the key, as a medical device. There were 32,385 that came up within a second. And I've highlighted the boxes. Notice these devices identify themselves as medical devices. Census also takes that information, puts it in the database. So Census, what it does is every 24 hours, it refreshes this and it's just collecting this information. To drill into it a little bit, if you'll do the next one. Okay, so there's other attributes that this thing will tell you. And if you notice, medical devices at the top, but it's telling me there, out of all these devices, 26,000 of them have a login page. And as a bad guy, I can really exploit that because most of the time these systems don't have the auto lockout after 3 attempts. So I can put a password cracker against it and stay on it. It's SCADA. There's IoT devices in there, and then we can get into even protocols. But if you go to the next one, I'll leave it on this. So this is not all the cities, but I just did it by city and, by country. And the U.S., in all the time I've been doing this, the U.S. tends to be hundreds of % higher than everybody else in the amount of the things that are exposed. So to bring it home is what I'm saying is there is the reason these things exist is because of what I said earlier about availability. As a service provider, that's where it came from, is making these available externally made my SLAs cheaper for you because I didn't have to roll a truck, which is a good thing, right? But the legacy stuff that's out there like this, I mean, and I see it too when they put new stuff. I see stuff pop up and it's brand new. I mean, it's the latest version, but yet it's right there on the web. So just be aware that you probably have an exposure you don't know anything about.
That's a great point. Eric, anything to add?
That was enlightening for me. So I will take it to my side, and just seeing those numbers. I approach security from a perspective of nowadays your information is probably already out there, right? So it's not necessarily just about keeping your information as secure as possible. You do want to do that, but there's a strong possibility that enough critical information about somebody is out there for a bad actor to piece together identity theft or something like that. There's enough information for them to put a fake you together and go out there and get hundreds of $1,000s worth of credit lines open or just whatever, right? But you want to implement the I can't even use the word common sense, the more practical safeguards when it comes to your own personal information. And something I like to tell people, and I picked this up on the Army side, is you're gonna have to give your information up for something nowadays, but do the best you can to declassify yourself. Meaning, make that information not as important. If somebody does get it, what could they really do with it that's really gonna hurt you or hurt you significantly? So in the Army, you have classified documents, and over time, if this document needs to move or it loses its lifespan or things like that, you start the process of declassification to make the information less important. So if you need to give it to somebody who has less authority or a lower security clearance than you, then now they can look at this information because it's been declassified. Well, take your personal data as much as you can and try to declassify it. Don't let it proliferate, and whatever is out there, try to keep it to where it's not, you don't stand out, because everybody's information out there. But if your information has a shiny object on it, then maybe the attacker wants to get your social security number.
That's a great point. The way I've incorporated that into my own paranoia as a cyber guy, right, is just something as simple as a credit freeze on your credit reports can now make your social security number almost unusable to somebody else, right? They can get it, but they can't open any new accounts based on that. They can do other things, but that's one of the main things they want it for, is to create new credit card account or a new loan or something like that, which they cannot do if you're got a freeze on your credit. And then the other quick tip I'll put out there from a like what you say, make it not declassify your information, is, when you do password reset phrases and such, if you're using, don't use your real information, right? Because anybody can go find out when you graduated from high school and what the mascot was, and probably even where you lived, when you were, what your address was these days. So, put some kind of salt in there, some kind of phrase that you always put in there, and then use the real thing, and that makes it easy to remember. But if you have a password manager, you can just make it totally random. That's just a text string. So that would be something that I'd say you could do to declassify your information. I like how you put that. All right. Well, I think that's kind of wrapping up our time here. Kara, are we ready to wrap it up?
Thanks for being here. We appreciate you joining us. Thanks to Chuck, Eric, and Fred. What a great session. If you had a question that didn't get answered, please send that to me on LinkedIn and I'll get an answer back to you. Have a great day. Thanks again.